She was religious in putting on her seatbelt. Why didn't she put it on that night?
Princess Diana was more than just royalty. She was the people's princess. With her grace, compassion, and defiance of royal traditions, she captured the hearts of millions across the globe. Yet behind the glamour and fairy tale image lay a life of turbulence, heartbreak, and a constant struggle against forces far greater than herself. On August 31st, 1997, the world was shattered when news broke that Diana had died in a car crash in Paris. Official reports blamed paparazzi and a driver under the influence. But almost immediately, questions began to emerge. Why were there so many inconsistencies in the timeline? Why were key witnesses ignored? And why, after all these years, do so many believe that the full truth has never been revealed? For decades, her death has remained one of the most enduring mysteries of the modern era. To some, it was a tragic accident. To others, it was the result of negligence. And to many, it was a deliberate act, a cover-up that silenced a woman who had become too powerful, too outspoken, and too uncontrollable for the establishment she once served. Now, after re-examined evidence, new testimonies, and hidden details brought to light, the story of Princess Diana's final days reveals something far darker than the public was ever told. What we uncover is not only shocking but devastating, a tale of betrayal, surveillance, and unanswered questions that continue to haunt history. This is not just the story of a princess. It is the story of a woman who challenged power, who sought freedom, and who paid the ultimate price. When Lady Diana Spencer first entered the public eye, the world believed it was witnessing a real-life fairy tale. At just 20 years old, Diana married Prince Charles in a lavish ceremony broadcast to an audience of over 750 million people worldwide. She was beautiful, kind, and seemingly destined for a life of happiness and privilege. But beneath the surface, the story was far from the dream the public imagined. From the very beginning, Diana struggled to adapt to the rigid expectations of royal life. She had married into a family bound by centuries of tradition, duty, and silence. Every move she made was scrutinized, every mistake amplified. What the cameras didn't capture was Diana's growing sense of isolation. She was young, inexperienced, and thrust into a role that demanded perfection, one she quickly realized she could never fulfill. Her marriage to Prince Charles, celebrated as a union of love, soon revealed cracks that would never heal. Charles remained emotionally distant, his heart still tethered to his longtime companion, Camilla Parker Bowles. Diana, meanwhile, was left feeling betrayed, unwanted, and increasingly alone. She later admitted in interviews that her marriage was crowded with 3 people, a painful truth that resonated with millions of women who admired her courage to speak openly. The pressures of this fractured relationship, combined with the suffocating weight of the monarchy, began to take a toll on her mental health. Diana battled eating disorders, depression, and anxiety. She confessed to moments of self-doubt so severe that she contemplated escape from it all. Yet, whenever she appeared in public, she put on the radiant smile of a princess, masking the pain she carried privately. Her struggles, however, only deepened her bond with the public. Unlike the aloof and distant royals of the past, Diana connected with ordinary people on an emotional level. She embraced the sick, comforted children, and championed causes that were considered controversial at the time, from HIV awareness to the campaign against landmines. For the first time, the monarchy seemed human, accessible, and compassionate, all because of Diana. But while the world adored her, the institution she represented viewed her independence as a threat. She was not content to play the silent, dutiful wife. She spoke out, gave candid interviews, and exposed the reality of her troubled marriage. In 1995, her explosive interview with the BBC's Panorama revealed just how fractured the royal household had become. Her honesty was groundbreaking, but it also made her enemies. To the monarchy, Diana had crossed an invisible line. She had gone from being a symbol of unity to a symbol of defiance. For the establishment, her growing popularity was dangerous. She was no longer just the people's princess. She was becoming a voice they could not control. By the time of her divorce in 1996, Diana had transformed from a dutiful young bride into a woman determined to live life on her own terms. Yet her newfound independence came at a cost. She had broken free from the crown, but she had also stepped into a world where her vulnerability was greater than ever. She was no longer protected by the palace, yet she remained endlessly pursued by the press, by admirers, and perhaps by forces that wanted her silence. The cracks that had begun in her marriage now widened into a chasm that would swallow her whole. Diana had become both adored and endangered, living in a spotlight that never dimmed, with shadows around her growing darker each day. After her divorce from Prince Charles in 1996, Princess Diana was, for the first time in her adult life, free from the suffocating grip of royal duty. Yet this freedom came with new challenges. Without the title of Her Royal Highness, she no longer had the same protections or the same insulation from the world's gaze. Instead, she was thrust into an even more dangerous spotlight, one where she was simultaneously admired, pursued, and targeted. Diana embraced her independence with a renewed sense of purpose. She threw herself into humanitarian causes that set her apart from the royal family. She walked through minefields in Angola to raise awareness of landmines, touched the hands of HIV patients at a time when fear and stigma isolated them, and continued to advocate for children's charities around the globe. Her compassion transcended borders, and in many ways, her influence as a divorced princess was greater than it had ever been as a wife to the heir to the throne. But with that influence came risk. Diana had become more outspoken, more visible, and more determined to shape her own story. Her actions, once celebrated, now drew suspicion from those who saw her independence as destabilizing. She was no longer bound by the palace, and she was no longer predictable. For an establishment built on control and silence, Diana's voice was dangerous. Her private life also became a source of endless fascination. By the summer of 1997, Diana was romantically linked to Dodi Fayed, the son of billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed. Their relationship, though brief, was explosive in the eyes of the media. The tabloids painted it as a scandal, feeding speculation about Diana's intentions. Some claimed she was seeking revenge against the royal family. Others suggested she was planning a new life abroad, perhaps even marriage. For the press, it was a frenzy. For Diana, it was yet another storm she had to endure. But beneath the romance and the flashing cameras, Diana confided to friends that she felt she was being watched. She spoke of phones being tapped, of cars following her, of letters that seemed to vanish. Whether paranoia or reality, her fears reflected the immense pressure she lived under. She had become one of the most photographed women in the world, pursued relentlessly by paparazzi who stopped at nothing to capture an image. Every outing was documented, every move dissected, and yet Diana carried herself with the same grace the world had come to admire. She shielded her sons, Prince William and Prince Harry, as much as possible, determined to give them a semblance of a normal life. She wanted them to grow up with compassion, with empathy, with the qualities that had defined her. To the world, she was radiant, smiling, and stronger than ever. But those closest to her knew she was also vulnerable, exhausted from the constant chase, and uneasy about the forces gathering around her. As the summer of 1997 unfolded, Diana appeared both at the height of her independence and at the center of a growing storm. Her humanitarian work had made her a global icon. Her love life made her a tabloid obsession. And her independence made her a potential threat to the very institutions she had once represented. What no one could have predicted was how quickly the storm would break, and how, within weeks, Diana's life would come to a sudden and devastating end in a Paris tunnel, sparking decades of questions, conspiracies, and grief that have never fully healed. By late August 1997, Princess Diana was enjoying a summer holiday that combined romance and escape. She and Dodi Fayed traveled through the Mediterranean, pursued at every stop by paparazzi who trailed them by boat, car, and even helicopter. For the press, Diana's new relationship was a goldmine. For Diana, it was both intoxicating and exhausting. She longed for peace, but privacy was a luxury she could never afford. On August 30th, Diana and Dodi arrived in Paris, staying at the Ritz Hotel owned by the Fayed family. That evening, the couple dined together, with security struggling to keep the paparazzi at bay. What should have been an intimate night out quickly became another circus, with photographers waiting at every exit. By the time Diana and Dodi decided to leave the hotel around midnight, plans were made to outmaneuver the relentless press. Henri Paul, the hotel's acting head of security, was assigned to drive the couple, with bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones accompanying them. The plan was simple: use a decoy vehicle to distract the paparazzi while their car slipped away quietly through a side entrance. But from the moment they left, things went wrong. Paparazzi spotted them, and a high-speed chase through the streets of Paris began. At 12:23 a.m. on August 31st, their black Mercedes entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel at high speed. Moments later, it crashed into a concrete pillar. The impact was devastating. Dodi Fayed and Henri Paul were killed instantly. Trevor Rees-Jones survived, but with life-threatening injuries. Diana was pulled from the wreckage alive, but barely. She was rushed to Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital, where doctors fought desperately to save her. Despite their efforts, she was pronounced dead at 4 a.m. The world awoke to the unimaginable. The people's princess was gone, and grief swept across nations. Outside Kensington Palace, seas of flowers lined the gates as millions mourned the woman who had seemed untouchable, immortal in her compassion. Yet while the public grieved, investigators began piecing together the events of that night. What they found only deepened the mystery. The official story claimed that Henri Paul had been intoxicated, driving recklessly while fleeing from aggressive paparazzi. Toxicology reports suggested high levels of alcohol and prescription drugs in his system. This narrative, presented swiftly, painted the crash as a tragic accident caused by human error and the intrusive press. But even in those first days, cracks began to show. Why was the ambulance carrying Diana delayed for nearly an hour before reaching the hospital, despite its close proximity? Why did witnesses describe seeing bright flashes of light inside the tunnel just before the crash? Why were the security cameras along the route mysteriously non-functional that night? And why did blood samples from Henri Paul raise suspicions of tampering with inconsistencies in their testing? Mohammed Al-Fayed, Dodi's father, immediately declared that the crash was no accident but a plot, a deliberate act to silence Diana and prevent her from marrying his son. He alleged that powerful forces feared what Diana might reveal, from her strained relationship with the monarchy to secrets about global politics. While many dismissed these claims as grief-fueled conspiracy, they struck a chord with those already questioning the official account. To complicate matters further, reports surfaced that Diana herself had voiced fears for her safety. Letters she had written months earlier suggested she believed there were plans to stage an accident involving her car. Whether coincidence or prophecy, the words seemed chilling in hindsight. The crash in the Alma tunnel was supposed to bring closure to a relentless chase. Instead, it opened a door to suspicion, theories, and unanswered questions that have never been fully resolved. For many, Diana's death was not just a tragedy. It was the silencing of a woman whose voice had grown too powerful to ignore. In the immediate aftermath of Diana's death, the world demanded answers. How could the most photographed woman on Earth perish in such a preventable way? French authorities quickly launched their investigation, and by 1999, their conclusion was clear. Henri Paul, intoxicated and reckless, bore responsibility for the crash. Paparazzi, though intrusive, were blamed only for escalating the chase. But for millions, that explanation felt far too simple. Diana wasn't just anyone. She was the ex-wife of the future King of England, the mother of a possible monarch, and a woman who had dared to challenge the traditions of the crown. Could her death really have been just a tragic accident? One of the most controversial pieces of evidence was Henri Paul's toxicology report. Officially, it showed a blood alcohol content over 3 times the legal limit. Yet friends and colleagues insisted Henri Paul wasn't a heavy drinker. Surveillance footage from the Ritz earlier that night showed him walking steadily, interacting normally, with no visible signs of intoxication. How could the man captured on camera appear sober while reports painted him as dangerously drunk? Adding to the suspicion were the missing and malfunctioning cameras in the Alma tunnel. In one of the busiest parts of Paris, not a single working traffic camera captured the fatal crash. Authorities claimed the cameras weren't operational at the time. For skeptics, it was simply too convenient. Then came the ambulance controversy. Though the hospital was less than 4 miles away, it took Diana's ambulance nearly an hour to arrive. Emergency responders defended the delay, saying Diana's injuries required delicate, on-the-spot care. But critics asked, was this slow pace a medical necessity, or an intentional move to ensure she wouldn't survive? Fueling these doubts was Diana's own voice from beyond the grave. In letters she wrote to close confidants, she expressed fear that there were plans to stage a car accident, a plot to silence her once and for all. In one particularly haunting note, she suggested her death would be orchestrated in a way that seemed accidental. To those who already doubted the official story, these words felt like undeniable proof. In the early 2000s, Mohammed Al-Fayed, Dodi's father, pushed relentlessly for justice. He claimed Diana was pregnant with Dodi's child, a union that the British establishment would never allow. According to him, elements within the monarchy and intelligence services feared the idea of Diana marrying into a Muslim family, creating a scandal that could destabilize the throne. His accusations drew international headlines, but official investigations consistently dismissed his claims. The most comprehensive inquiry came years later with Operation Paget, led by British authorities. This massive investigation reviewed thousands of documents, re-interviewed witnesses, and examined every theory. In 2006, its conclusion mirrored the French. Diana's death was a tragic accident caused by reckless driving, paparazzi pursuit, and the failure to wear seatbelts. Conspiracies, they insisted, had no basis, in fact, and yet the doubts never went away. Why did so many witnesses report seeing flashes of light inside the tunnel just before the crash? Why were Diana's letters, warning of an orchestrated accident, brushed aside as paranoia? Why were inconsistencies in Henri Paul's toxicology never fully explained? The official answers satisfied some, but for others, they raised more questions than they resolved. For the public, Diana's death became more than just a tragedy. It became a symbol. She had been the most beloved member of the royal family, a woman who spoke openly about her struggles, her humanitarian missions, and her rejection of royal protocol. To many, she was a threat to the carefully controlled image of the monarchy. And when she died, it was easier for people to believe she had been silenced than that fate had simply been cruel. Decades later, flowers are still left at the gates of Kensington Palace, and questions still linger in the public's imagination. Was Diana the victim of chance and circumstance, or the target of something darker? The truth perhaps lies buried with her in Althorpe. But one thing is certain, the mystery of Princess Diana will never fade, because her life and her death changed the world forever.